The world you inhabit is loud, chaotic, and relentlessly demanding. From the moment you open your eyes, you are bombarded by the opinions of strangers, the pressure to perform, and an underlying current of anxiety about a future you cannot predict. It is easy to look at our modern era and assume that this psychological exhaustion is a unique byproduct of technology and social media. But the human struggle against chaos is ancient. 2,000 years ago, a man sat in a military tent near the frozen borders of the Danube River. He was the most powerful individual on Earth, ruling over an empire of 70 million people. He faced an economy crippled by a deadly plague, political betrayals from his closest generals, and the constant threat of war. His name was Marcus Aurelius. Yet, despite holding the weight of the Western world on his shoulders, his mind remained as calm and unyielding as marble. He did not survive this pressure through luck. He survived it through a rigorous, daily application of Stoic philosophy. To understand how to become mentally untouchable in the modern world, we must first study the personal rules of the last good emperor of Rome. Marcus Aurelius viewed his mind not as a passive recipient of external events, but as a citadel, an internal fortress that no outside force could penetrate unless he willingly opened the gates. In his private journal, which we now know as Meditations, he wrote a line that serves as the ultimate shield against modern anxiety. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Think deeply about how much of your daily stress is born from a complete violation of this rule. When you worry about whether your boss likes your project, when you stress over the tone of a text message, or when you lose sleep over economic inflation, you are actively trying to control the outside world. The Stoic looks at these situations and immediately draws a sharp line of demarcation. Your effort is within your citadel. The outcome is outside your walls. The emperor understood that when you tether your happiness to things outside your control, you are no longer a ruler. You are a slave to circumstance. To maintain his composure amidst the backstabbing politics of Rome, Marcus engineered a brilliant psychological exercise that he practiced every single morning before dawn. He would sit in the quiet dark and tell himself that the people he dealt with today would be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot distinguish good from evil. But he had seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and he had recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to his own. This morning ritual is the ancient antidote to what psychologists now call reactive anger. Most of us go out into our days expecting perfection. We expect the traffic to flow smoothly, our coworkers to be polite, and our plans to go flawlessly. When reality inevitably breaks these expectations, we snap. We get angry, our heart rate spikes, and our productivity is ruined for hours. Marcus Aurelius did not allow himself the luxury of surprise. By mentally rehearsing the worst traits of human nature before stepping outside, he stripped his enemies of their shock value. When an advisor lied to him later that afternoon, the emperor did not lose his temper. He simply checked his mental list and noted that reality was behaving exactly as he had predicted. The true secret to Marcus Aurelius's legendary composure was his ability to shrink his perspective until his problems became microscopic. When the pressures of the empire threatened to overwhelm him, he would look up at the night sky and practice what modern philosophers call the view from above. He reminded himself that the grand city of Rome was merely a tiny speck on a massive earth, and that his entire life was a brief, passing whisper in the infinite timeline of the universe. When you look at your worries through this cosmic lens, the illusion of their importance instantly shatters. The awkward conversation you keep replaying in your head, the bill you are stressed about paying, the insult from a stranger on the internet, these are not cataclysms. They are fleeting anomalies in an indifferent universe. Marcus used this realization not to fall into despair, but to achieve absolute psychological freedom. It allowed him to drop the heavy burden of public validation and focus entirely on the only thing that mattered, acting with justice, courage, and wisdom in the present moment. You are caught in an invisible economic mouse trap, and the faster you run, the tighter it squeezes your life. Think honestly about your financial history. A few years ago, you likely made significantly less money than you do today. Back then, you probably told yourself a comforting lie. The ancient masters of Stoicism recognized that the only way to defeat hedonic adaptation is to practice intentional visual inversion. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius used to look at luxury items and systematically deconstruct them in his mind to remove their psychological power. He would look at a premium purple royal robe and remind himself that it was merely sheep's wool dyed with the blood of a shellfish. He would look at an expensive, lavish feast and remind himself that it was nothing more than dead animals and decaying matter. You must apply this exact same clinical detachment to modern financial marketing. When you see a luxury vehicle commercial, train your brain to look past the shiny metal and see it for what it truly is. A rapidly depreciating multi-ton metal asset that will drain your cash flow through insurance, maintenance, and interest payments. When you see a designer product, realize it is a cheap fabric stamped with a logo designed to exploit your need for social signaling. The truly unshakable individual operates on an internal scorecard. They realize that the ultimate financial status symbol is not a luxury item. It is absolute control over your morning. It is the ability to wake up every single day and realize that nobody owns your time, nobody can fire you, and your financial foundations are completely untouchable. As we build this masterclass framework, you must understand that building an inner financial citadel requires strict risk mitigation. When translating savings into market assets, framers must ignore concentrated, speculative vehicles. If you focus on individual tech stocks or volatile crypto assets, you face a massive potential for total capital loss. True wealth architecture demands a diversified portfolio context. Allocate capital systematically into low-cost, broad-market index funds that capture the growth of the entire global economy, rather than gambling your freedom on a single point of failure. This brings us to the second boundary of the wealth trap, the mimetic prison of social signaling. As human beings, we do not naturally know what to want. Instead, we look at what the people around us desire and we copy them. This is what philosophers call mimetic desire. If you enter a corporate workspace where everyone drives a certain brand of car, wears a specific watch, and talks about buying homes in certain neighborhoods, your brain subconsciously begins to prioritize those exact same goals. You convince yourself that you actually want these things, completely blind to the fact that you are simply mimicking the insecurities of your peers. Social signaling is an incredibly expensive game because it has no finish line. You are spending your real wealth, the hours of your life, to purchase a temporary mask of prosperity. You buy the mask to signal to people you don't even like that you are doing well, while behind closed doors, your bank statement reveals that you are entirely broke. You have traded your actual financial independence for the mere appearance of it. To escape the mimetic prison, you must develop behavioral barriers that isolate your decisions from the crowd. Look at the people you are trying to compete with. Are they actually free? Or are they trapped in 50-hour work weeks, drowning in debt, and terrified of missing a single paycheck? Why would you copy the spending habits of people whose lifestyle requires them to remain corporate slaves? The moment you stop looking outward for validation is the moment you reclaim your financial sovereignty. Epicurus famously remarked that if you live according to nature, you will never be poor. If you live according to opinion, you will never be rich. True wealth is silent. It does not feel the need to shout, display, or signal. It sits quietly in asset columns, quietly compounding while generating real, unadulterated time freedom. The third phase of our behavioral masterclass unmasks the cognitive paralysis of choice overload and modern FOMO marketing. The financial marketplace is no longer a simple place of exchange. It is a hyper-connected, fast-moving psychological war zone. Every day, your phone delivers notifications about exploding asset classes, meme coins making teenagers overnight millionaires, and tech stocks skyrocketing to historical highs. This creates an intense, constant state of low-level panic known as the fear of missing out. Your brain, overwhelmed by choices and starved for rapid rewards, drops its long-term defensive strategy and switches to short-term speculation. You start chasing the green candles on the chart, buying at the absolute peak of a market cycle out of pure emotional impatience. When the market inevitably corrects, panic sets in, and you sell your assets at a massive loss. This behavioral cycle is exactly how retail investors systematically destroy their lifetime savings. The antidote to cognitive paralysis is radical simplicity and automated execution. You must intentionally reduce your financial choices down to a single, non-negotiable operational process. If you have an emergency fund safely built, your investing strategy should be entirely automated and completely boring. Wealth accumulation is not an exciting sport. It is an exercise in monotony. Set up automatic transfers that pull capital from your primary income and drop it directly into broad market index funds the exact hour you get paid. By automating the process, you remove human emotion, human hesitation, and human panic from the timeline. You no longer care if the market is up or down on any given Tuesday, because you are no longer playing a short-term psychological game. You are systematically buying back pieces of your future freedom with clinical, unemotional detachment. The final pillar of our financial masterclass requires a complete architectural inversion of your daily environment. Knowledge without structural application is completely useless. To ensure your mind and your bank account remain completely untouchable over the next 90 days, you must execute a strict three-phase behavioral order of operations. Phase 1 requires an immediate expense freeze. Log into your bank dashboard tonight. Extract every single automated subscription, recurring fee, and hidden expense leak. List your absolute non-negotiable monthly living costs. Implement a mandatory 48-hour cooling-off rule on any non-essential purchase over $50. By forcing a time delay between your consumer impulse and your actual purchase, you successfully starve the dopamine loop that drives impulsive spending. Phase 2 demands the construction of your fortress accumulation fund. Route every single dollar saved from your expense freeze into a separate, unlinked, high-yield savings account. Do not touch this capital, do not invest it, and do not look at it as spending money. Build a rock-solid emergency cushion that covers exactly 6 months of your absolute survival expenses. This cash must remain entirely liquid and safe. This is not about making a return on your investment. It is about purchasing total psychological peace of mind. When you know you can survive for half a year without a single dollar of corporate income, your workplace anxiety completely vanishes. You stop making decisions out of fear, and you start operating from a position of absolute internal strength. Phase 3 is the implementation of automated inversion. Set your brokerage accounts to automatically process your investment allocations before you ever have a chance to see or spend the money. Pay your future self first, making the remaining capital your strict, non-negotiable lifestyle limit. If the world around you chooses to drown in debt, lifestyle inflation, and cheap dopamine, let them. Keep your fortress walls high, stay anchored to your internal scorecard, and execute your long-term plan with absolute, unshakable consistency. True freedom is not about forcing the world to recognize your status. True freedom is no longer needing their validation to know exactly who you are. The blueprint of human behavior requires us to zoom into our everyday physical actions if we wish to escape these deep psychological traps. To truly change your wealth, you must change your personal daily execution. This requires an absolute masterclass in self-discipline, starting with the very first hours of your morning. Most people begin their day in a state of immediate voluntary defeat. They wake up to an aggressive audio alert, reach for their phone while still half asleep, and flood their brain with instant visual overstimulation. They read negative news headlines, look at curated lifestyle images on social media, and read stressful messages before their feet even touch the floor. In less than 60 seconds, they have surrendered their focus to external platforms. They spend the rest of their afternoon operating in a reactive, frantic mental loop. To break this pattern, you must look at how the ancient masters structured their entry into the day. Seneca once observed that true freedom is standing above the trivial concerns that consume the average crowd. A structured morning routine is your primary shield against the psychological manipulation of modern consumer environments. Before the world has an opportunity to sell you anything, you must establish an unyielding internal anchor. This begins by implementing a complete digital blackout during the first hour of your day. Your smartphone should be locked in another room or placed on silent. This boundary ensures that your primary thoughts are generated from within your own consciousness, rather than being injected by a tech algorithm designed to maximize your impulse spending. Once you have reclaimed your morning space, your next behavioral requirement is the systematic auditing of your mind using physical paper. Journaling is frequently misunderstood as an artistic or sentimental exercise. For a disciplined thinker, it is a clinical extraction tool. When you write your raw anxieties, fears, and financial targets onto a physical page, you are performing a biological dump. You pull the chaotic internal monologue out of your brain and trap it in a physical reality where it can be viewed objectively. Marcus Aurelius did not write his private records to impress a future audience. He wrote them to cross-examine his own internal biases and maintain his composure. When your fears are documented clearly in black and white, you realize they are rarely as catastrophic as your overthinking mind believes. You strip them of their mystery and prepare yourself to dismantle them with cold logic. Following your mind audit, you must intentionally expose your biology to voluntary physical hardship. The human body is naturally programmed to seek the path of least resistance. In our modern luxury-filled society, this biological drive leads directly to comfort addiction. We avoid discomfort at all costs, which inadvertently makes our mind fragile, weak, and highly susceptible to panic. By deliberately inserting a short, controlled burst of voluntary suffering into your morning, such as a freezing shower or intense physical training, you intentionally shock your nervous system. You prove to your brain that you are entirely capable of handling intense discomfort without panicking. When you voluntarily choose the harder path at dawn, the minor frustrations of your daily commute or workplace politics feel completely trivial. You build a deep reservoir of psychological grit that keeps you calm when unexpected crises arrive as you step outward into the economy. You must pair this physical discipline with a clear visual perspective check. The ancient Stoics mastered a practice known as cognitive recentering, where they would look at their immediate personal space and consciously widen their lens until their entire life became a tiny speck in the context of history. Modern life forces you to look at your world through a magnifying glass, causing minor daily issues to appear massive and terrifying. When you actively expand your mental field of view, you realize that your present problems, your social anxieties, and your fears of judgment are profoundly small. This structural shift does not make your actions irrelevant. It makes your irrational fears vanish. It frees up your cognitive energy to focus exclusively on executing your personal targets, leaving the background chatter of the crowd entirely behind you. This structured behavior directly feeds into your ability to resist the primary wealth trap, the constant pressure of lifestyle inflation. To remain financially bulletproof, you must establish an explicit cap on your lifestyle consumption. The standard trajectory of the consumer class is a continuous upgrade cycle. As soon as their income moves upward, they immediately upgrade their apartment size, their food choices, and their material possessions. They justify these expenses by calling them necessities, completely blind to the fact that they are simply trying to validate their status to their social circle. The unshakable individual treats any financial surplus not as an opportunity to consume, but as a strategic asset to buy back their future time. They intentionally keep their living standards locked at a stable baseline, allowing the widening gap between their income and their expenses to compound quietly in diversified index funds. They find their security in their growing asset column, not in the empty displays of material wealth. To successfully execute this long-term compounding strategy, you must train your mind to look at financial volatility through the lens of objective reality. The modern investment market is explicitly designed to trigger your survival instincts. Flashing red screens, sensational media headlines, and sudden market crashes are engineered to provoke immediate fear. The retail investor looks at a market correction and experiences the exact same evolutionary panic as an ancient human fleeing a predator. They sell their investments at a loss to stop the immediate emotional pain. The disciplined wealth architect views a market downturn with absolute mathematical detachment. They understand that a correction is simply a normal, predictable cycle of the economic environment. Because they possess a 6-month cash fortress, they do not need to liquidate their assets during a downswing. They remain entirely still, allowing their automated investments to systematically accumulate cheap assets while the panicking crowd locks in their losses. This level of behavioral mastery ultimately requires you to confront your own mortality. Human beings waste massive amounts of lifetime energy obsessing over social trivialities because they live under the subconscious illusion that they will live forever. We worry about what a stranger thinks of our choices, we fear minor rejections, and we put off our primary goals because we assume we have an infinite supply of time. The practice of keeping your mortality at the forefront of your awareness is the ultimate antidote to procrastination and people-pleasing. When you remind yourself daily that your time on this rock is incredibly limited and entirely temporary, the fear of public judgment instantly loses its power over your behavior. You realize that living your life to satisfy the expectations of others is a profound waste of your limited existence. You drop the heavy burden of social compliance and focus exclusively on building a legacy of self-mastery, internal peace, and real financial freedom. To sustain this mindset across months and years, you must consciously isolate yourself from the hyperstimulated environments that deplete your willpower. Your willpower is a finite cognitive resource. Every single time you are forced to resist a notification, an ad, or a tempting consumer distraction, you drain a small piece of your mental energy. By the end of the afternoon, your defenses are depleted, leaving you highly vulnerable to impulsive behaviors. The elite wealth creator does not rely on raw willpower to stay disciplined. They design an environment where discipline is the natural default setting. They delete toxic applications, block distracting websites, and create physical distance between themselves and the systems designed to exploit their biology. They structure their environment so that the right behavior is easy to execute, and the destructive behavior is physically difficult to perform. This environmental design must extend directly to your chosen social circle. You cannot build an unshakable mindset if your closest advisors are entirely consumed by cheap dopamine and consumer comparison. Human behavior is inherently contagious. If you spend your time surrounded by individuals who live paycheck to paycheck, complain about their circumstances, and rely on immediate gratification to escape their reality, your brain will slowly accept that behavior as standard. You must deliberately seek out environments that challenge your capacity for focus, discipline, and long-term asset building. Surround yourself with thinkers who value self-control over empty status symbols. If you cannot find these individuals locally, find them in historical books, high-value educational content, and structured communities dedicated to self-mastery. Elevate your inputs, and your internal behavioral choices will naturally follow. Ultimately, your journey to becoming mentally and financially untouchable is not an overnight transformation. It is a slow, compounding war won through tiny, mundane daily decisions. Every single time you choose to leave your phone untouched in the morning, every time you choose to automate your savings rather than spend them on an impulse purchase, and every time you choose to reframe a difficult crisis as a test of your patience, you add a fresh layer of steel to your internal armor. The crowd will continue to run on the hedonic treadmill, chasing the fleeting mirage of external validation while remaining permanently anxious and broke. Let them run. Keep your eyes locked on your internal scorecard, stay fiercely committed to your personal boundaries, and execute your daily roadmap with absolute clinical consistency. The ultimate prize of this life is not an abundance of luxury possessions. It is the absolute sovereignty over your own mind, your own wealth, and your own time. To maintain this absolute sovereignty, you must understand how to protect your cognitive focus from the final and most insidious trap of the modern era, the illusion of productivity. In our hyperconnected economy, it is incredibly easy to confuse movement with progress. We fill our calendars with endless low-value tasks, organize our desks, answer immediate emails, and scroll through educational content, convincing ourselves that we are working hard. This behavior is simply a sophisticated form of procrastination. It is an emotional defense mechanism used to avoid the difficult, uncomfortable high-leverage tasks that actually drive personal development and wealth creation. True progress requires deep, uninterrupted focus on a single objective for extended blocks of time. You must learn to ruthlessly cut away the administrative noise and spend your primary energy executing the hard, complex tasks that the average person avoids out of pure mental laziness. This level of deep execution demands that you establish total control over your attention span. The greatest commodity in the modern world is not gold or oil. It is your attention. Every multi-billion-dollar tech corporation is locked in a fierce psychological war to capture your next second of focus. When you give in to their notifications, click on their clickbait, or jump from task to task, you are actively fragmenting your brain's capacity for deep thought. A fragmented mind is completely incapable of building wealth or mastering human behavior. You must train your attention like a physical muscle through rigorous concentration exercises. When you sit down to complete a task, eliminate every secondary input. Close all extra browser tabs, clear your workspace, and lock your focus onto that single objective for 90 minutes. At first, your brain will feel a physical itch to check for a distraction. Resist it. Sit with the discomfort. Over time, your attention span will deepen, allowing you to produce higher quality output in a single afternoon than the distracted crowd can manage in an entire month. This attention mastery must also be applied directly to how you process your failures. The path to financial independence and personal development is never a clean, upward line. You will inevitably make behavioral mistakes. You will have days where you break your budget, afternoons where you succumb to distraction, and investment periods where your strategy underperforms. The amateur looks at these setbacks and falls into a spiral of self-blame, using their mistakes as an excuse to completely abandon their discipline. The Stoic architect treats their failures with clinical, scientific objectivity. They do not get emotional. They simply analyze the data. They look at the mistake and ask, what environmental trigger caused my behavior to break down? How can I alter my architecture to ensure this vulnerability is covered next time? They reframe the failure as a valuable data point, immediately adjust their systems, and step back onto their path without a single second of wasted emotional regret. As your discipline deepens, you will notice a profound shift in how you relate to the concept of time. The average person treats time as an unlimited resource, spending it carelessly on low-value entertainment, trivial arguments, and social media loops. They live as if they have centuries to spare, completely blind to the fact that time is the only truly non-renewable asset they possess. You can always make more money. You can never manufacture more time. The elite behavioral architect values their hours far more than their cash flow. They realize that every hour spent on an unproductive distraction is an hour of their life they have permanently traded away. This realization forces you to become incredibly protective of your schedule. You learn to say a definitive, polite no to social obligations that do not align with your core values, business opportunities that drain your focus, and relationships that bring emotional chaos into your citadel. You treat your time as your most sacred capital, investing it exclusively into activities that compound your wisdom, your health, and your long-term independence. This structural protection of your time ultimately allows you to master the mechanics of compounding. Compounding is the most powerful force in the natural and financial universe, yet human behavior is structurally unsuited to witness it. Because our brains evolved in an environment where immediate survival was the only metric, we struggle to comprehend geometric growth. We expect linear results. When we invest money, practice a habit, or study a topic for 3 months and see minimal outward change, our primitive brain assumes the effort is being wasted. This is the exact moment where 95% of people quit. They break the compounding loop right before the exponential curve begins to climb. The unshakable individual ignores the daily linear feedback. They do not look at the scoreboard every afternoon. They find their satisfaction entirely in the flawless execution of their daily system, confident in the mathematical reality that consistent, uninterrupted compounding across years will inevitably produce massive, life-altering results. To protect this compounding loop from internal sabotage, you must master the architecture of your self-talk. The narrative you repeat inside your own mind is the most powerful force dictating your physical behavior. If you constantly tell yourself a story that you are an overthinker, that you are naturally undisciplined, or that you are a victim of an unfair economy, your subconscious brain will actively find ways to manifest that reality. It will look for excuses to break your habits and justify your failures. You must treat your internal dialogue with the exact same strict boundaries you apply to your physical fortress. Erase the language of helplessness and passivity from your mind. Replace it with the language of absolute personal ownership. Instead of saying, "I have to do this difficult task," remind yourself that, "I chose to do this difficult task because it aligns with my freedom." When you alter the narrative of your mind, your physical execution instantly becomes lighter, sharper, and completely unstoppable. Ultimately, your long-term success is anchored to your ability to remain calm in the face of macroeconomic uncertainty. The world around you will continue to experience volatility. Markets will expand and collapse, political regimes will shift, and new technologies will disrupt entire employment sectors. The distracted, undisciplined crowd will spend their lives in a state of permanent panic, constantly reacting to the latest trend and moving their capital from one emergency to the next. Let them drown in the noise. Your job is to remain entirely unyielding, a steady point of absolute clarity in a world of pure confusion. Keep your cash fortress fully capitalized, keep your investment strategy completely automated, and keep your morning routine non-negotiable. Trust your systems, anchor yourself to your internal standard of virtue, and let the outside world move as it will. True freedom is not a location, a title, or a specific dollar amount in a bank account. True freedom is the absolute, unshakable command over your own behavior, your own focus, and your own life. Stand tall within your citadel, execute your daily blueprint with clinical consistency, and let nothing in this world move you from your path.